And Laurel, I would like to invite you to the stage to share your vision with us in this afternoon session. Laurel.
Hello. It is so nice to be in such good company. I can't tell you, so many kind of photographic heroes of mine are here in the same room. So I'm very humbled and excited to be here today. And I just wanted to say thank you to everyone at FOAM for really making such an interesting context. It's really nice to have these kinds of moments of contemplation and public discussion, and I wish there were more of them, in fact. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what I'm about to show you, and then I'm going to launch into my talk. The very first part of the visuals, it's just a collection to show the kind of work that I show on my blog, iheartphotograph.com, for those of you who are not familiar with it. What I've done is I've just kind of piled on top of one another a handful of images that I've posted or curated there in the past year to kind of quickly give you a sort of visual idea of the kinds of things that I've been thinking about or drawn to in the things that I try and share online. And the way that I set up the PowerPoint presentation was intentionally to maybe kind of foreground this idea of the sort of rapid-fire notion of how images accumulate and circulate in an online context. And so forgive me for not having time to stop and say the name of every photographer, but that's one of the consequences of someone who is curating things in such a rapid basis. It's this constant flow. But I invite you to go back to my website if you're curious to find out who any of these photographers are or to learn more about their work. There are links provided on the website to everyone's work that I post. One funny thing was I wanted to, in fact, have my entire presentation work this way, and I came up to a limit of PowerPoint where I wanted to have one photograph from every single blog post that I've posted in the last 4 years to become the sort of visual backdrop for what I wanted to say today, and PowerPoint just started kind of crashing, and my computer started shaking, and we can't take any more images, it was saying to me, which is really funny because in online space, it always feels like you can only have infinitely more, and in fact, you have to have them at such a rapid-fire pace in a way to kind of entice people to keep looking. So what I wanted to really frame here today is kind of this question, one of these polemical questions that FOAM has offered up about are bloggers the curators of the 21st century? And one really interesting thing about my own position is that I'm kind of in between these two categories. We heard a little bit in the visions this morning, kind of this question of the amateur photographer versus the sort of expert professional photographer. And I kind of see myself as the sort of amateur curator figure who's been asked to become a professional in this field. So the way that I've gotten kind of my start curating things in real life or in physical space is in fact just through running a blog. And a blog, nonetheless, that I didn't really think much about in the beginning, or maybe I would have given it a better title, or maybe it would look a little bit different than it does. It was really a 5-minute decision for me to start a blog. And the reason that is because I only conceived of this as a personal project. So in 2006, like almost everyone else in the world, I thought it would be really nice to kind of have a place to kind of collect information all in one place. And so I was thinking of the blog almost as something like along the lines of a visual Rolodex for myself, where I was noticing a lot of really interesting work and my habits were changing so much. Instead of going to galleries or museums, I was more frequently finding websites of photographers that I was interested in online. And so I was really just kind of looking for kind of a home or a context to collect these things. And I think once I started the blog, I sent the link out to maybe 5 people in the world who I admired things that they were doing, or I thought maybe they would find something interesting in this. And then completely to my surprise, I learned exactly what a public medium the internet is. And I was starting to be bombarded by people sending me their work, really interested in following the blog. And so it opened up this kind of unexpected line of communication with the world that has been really meaningful to me. And I think it's really interesting to think about how, as someone who has become a curator through the lens of blogging and kind of curating things in this online context, which we often think of as this kind of meaningless, empty, contextlessness, vast universe of things, how the ways that I've kind of adapted the things that I've learned online to how I curate things in physical space, I think is an interesting proposition to maybe introduce here. And I think that I'm really curious about this question of how we can maybe reinvent the role of a curator or the role of institutions given all these changes that we see happening in culture, that we see happening with the way that images circulate online. I've kind of tried to make a sort of tidy list of the things in particular that I think over my kind of time of being a blogger, what are the things that I really kind of noticed that are a bit different about how images or artworks can circulate online versus in physical space? And I guess I would say, for now, my working list is that it presents very different means of production, very new forms of hybridity between images and objects and mediums kind of coming together and bouncing off one another in really interesting ways. New modes of authorship. Some of that was explored in the copyright-based panel that I attended this morning. New economies of attention, which is something that I guess I think a lot about in the translation between online space and what it means to be an online curator versus the kind of attention that images command when they have a kind of physical presence or they're in front of us. New possibilities of distribution. So the ways that images circulate now are kind of radically different, and we have a lot less control over them than we used to in mediums like books or exhibitions, for example. And then I would say there's also this kind of new form of sociality, where the image itself almost kind of becomes socialized or takes on its own kind of persona once it enters the network. And so those are the kinds of things that I'm thinking a lot about and that I'm trying to imagine, how can we take these new modes and these new ways of thinking of how artwork functions and then kind of turn it into how an exhibition could work or what the role of a curator should be if we do our jobs ethically or responsibly, but given this kind of new set of conditions. And so I'm going to just kind of try and quickly get to the end of this, because the other thing that I wanted to kind of talk about and maybe kind of put on the table as a way to think about how we can take the things that come from this experience of how images exist online, what curating means online, and to kind of introduce it into physical space, I thought it would be maybe a good way for me to do that would be just to kind of quickly present a few projects that I have done in more traditional exhibition space, because I think you'll quickly start to see that the ways that I'm thinking about how a curator functions and what an artwork is kind of, it's a radical revisiting of those concepts. And as was mentioned in my introduction, I decided to go back to school to get my master's degree in curatorial studies precisely because I had started this blog and I had I started to be asked to curate exhibitions, which I found out I really loved and was really grateful for these invitations. But I felt to really understand my own perspective or what was new or interesting about what I was doing, I had to really own up to the kind of history of exhibition making and what did curating used to be, because I really only see this sort of futuristic version, and that feels very natural to me and very much of my own generation. So the blog for me, for instance, is just a really personal kind of project. I can't imagine that it's interesting to anyone, and every time I'm asked to speak about it, I feel really confused about what to say, because it's like someone asking you, to talk about how you get dressed for work in the morning or something. It really feels that natural.